The purpose of this video is to demonstrate the features that are present in the 3D Tooth Atlas and show how we can effectively use this program to enhance student learning. There were three purposes behind the development of this program. The first was to provide a comprehensive resource that contained all the textual and visual information required to learn the morphology of each tooth, including the primary, secondary, pulpal, and radiographic morphology. The second purpose was to enhance the spatial abilities of students, since we know their ability to visualize 3D tooth structures is important. We want them to be able to manipulate in their mind a 3D image of all of the teeth. The optimization of these 3D spatial abilities is very important, since the scientific literature clearly indicates that success in all of the sciences is linked to spatial abilities. The third purpose of the program was to provide a resource for faculty so that they could create interactivity in class, a process that enhances learning and increases the interest of students. While this program can be used in a self-instructional format and be effective through creative assignments, it's most powerful when it's used in the classroom by faculty, and that's what I will be demonstrating. I've been effectively using this program for more than 10 years. I use one traditional PowerPoint presentation during the first class session to familiarize students with terminology that we'll be using in describing the teeth. After that, the entire course is taught using only the 3D Tooth Atlas. This process works very well, and I want to share my positive classroom experience with other educators. After all, we're all interested in optimizing student learning, and this resource can be incredibly helpful in that process. Now, a key factor in achieving enhanced student learning is for faculty to use the program in class and have quizzes and examinations that are based on the content present in the program. When students know they're going to be tested on the content, and they have questions that come from the visual and textual information in the program, they're going to use the program outside of class to access both the visual and textual content. And when they access the content and use it, they learn. I use visual and textual quizzes given at the beginning of the period over the program assignment, and in this way, students will use the program on their own, enhance their spatial abilities, as well as didactic knowledge. Now for a little demonstration. How could I and how do I use this program in, let's say, a 50-minute class period? You can see on the screen the splash page as you open the program, and I begin in the tooth morphology section, and here we have both the primary and secondary dentition. So if we click on the secondary dentition, then as you mouse over each tooth in the left-hand column, it highlights that tooth, and of course we are starting with the central incisor, the maxillary central incisor. And if you click on any of these features here, such as the facial, mesial, occlusal, then you can go back and forth between these features and different views. And if you click on, for instance, the crown dimensions, then what appears is a graphic that helps you to understand what's written in the textual material that appears on the right, that is also referenced by all the authors that have described that. So in this way, you can go through each of the views of the tooth, click on any one of the features in there, and see the feature along with the textual information related to that particular feature. This section is based on the literature. It's a review of everything that's been written in the last 100 years, beginning with G.V. Black's textbook in the 1800s, actually more than 100 years. Now, if we were to go to the next section, which is the comparison section, here again we have the important information that each student needs to know. That is, to be able to compare those teeth that are comparable to each other in morphology and know the specific differences. So it's the same process. The features are here. You can see the facial view of the comparison of the maxillary central and lateral incisor, and as you click on each one of those, a graphic and the text appears. So this becomes the student's encyclopedia of information, their reference source for the morphology of each individual primary and secondary tooth, along with the comparisons that they need to know. And it's comparisons, of course, where a lot of questions are derived on examinations. Another section is the rotations and slices. And in this particular section, you have a picture of the tooth on the left, in the middle a CT scan of that tooth, and in the right a radiograph of that tooth. So if you take the slider bar at the bottom and you rotate that, then you can simultaneously show the picture, the CT scan, as well as the radiograph. And faculty can then use a variety of different thought processes to help the students understand not just the morphology, but how it correlates with other disciplines of dentistry. For instance, in the extraction of a maxillary central incisor, since it has a cone-shaped root that rarely curves, then you're able to rotate the tooth during extraction to be able to remove it. In the very right-hand area, there's a vertical slider that allows you to view the cross-sectional morphology of these teeth. So you can study all of the cross-sectional morphology of each tooth, as well as the 3D representation as you rotate it around. There's a 3D section, and in here you have a large library of teeth that have actually been scanned for us. One is a so-called perfect tooth. This is actually a model and represents the so-called ideal central incisor. And with this, you can change the enamel opacity, you can change the dentin opacity, and here you'll actually be able to visualize the so-called average tooth, its enamel, its dentin, and the pulp morphology. There are also actual extracted teeth that provide a wide range of opportunities to discuss various aspects in the morphology of the tooth. And you can go down through these and become acquainted with a lot of different teeth. And as an example, let's, for instance, look at the maxillary first premolar. If we were to go to the 3D teeth in that area and we were to pick a particular tooth, we can rotate this around, and there's a wide range of opportunities we have to help the student begin to develop their spatial abilities. So for instance, we have on the occlusal surface, traversing from one fossa to the other, we have the central developmental groove. So one thing I could do would be to ask the students, look at that central developmental groove, and then look at the marginal ridges of the teeth, both on the mesial and distal surfaces of the tooth. And where is that central developmental groove? Is it located cervical to the marginal ridge? Is it level with the marginal ridge? Where is that relative position? We have two cusps. We have a facial cusp and a lingual cusp. Which cusp is located furthest away from the cervical line? So all of those things can be used in class, looking at the depressions in the surface of the crown, looking at the developmental root depressions, and a wide range of opportunities to help the student with their three-dimensional perspective. There's also a radiographic section in here, and we could look, for instance, at periapical radiograph and the different features that we would want a student to be able to recognize on a periapical radiograph. We can highlight those on the actual radiograph. We've clicked on it in the left-hand column, and some textual information about that particular anatomic feature appears in the right-hand area. There's also panoramic radiographs where we can do the same thing. You can show the mental foramen, You can show the mandibular canal, the mandibular foramen, the different anatomic features that you would like to have a student know. There's also a library of radiographs that show all sorts of normal and abnormal types of morphology, many of them, of course, with root canal treated teeth that help to highlight the presence of lateral canals, the presence of extra roots, and all sorts of things. And this section ends with a study quiz that has questions that the student can then answer and see how they do on a simulated examination format. Now, if we go back to our original opening splash page, there's a human dentition synopsis section, and if you click on this, then we have some very unique learning opportunities here. I can go to the secondary tooth morphology, and when you click on this, you have the principal morphologic comparisons and the unique characteristics, two of the most important anatomic pieces of information that a student can learn. How do maxillary, central, and lateral incisors compare with each other, and what are the unique characteristics of those particular teeth? So if we were to click on the maxillary incisors, we see the numbering systems used in different parts of the world, and we can go to the next button, and that shows us the facial view of the maxillary, central, and lateral incisors. And here is the focus. I expect students to know everything that's in this section, and this is where almost all of their questions are derived. And I also engage them interactively in class. For instance, if we talk about crown form, then I will ask the class, okay, here we have our central incisor and here we have a lateral incisor. Which one of those teeth is more square from a facial view? And then you'll get some dialogue going on, and as the class moves along, students will become more comfortable and they'll start responding to you, and that gives you then the opportunity to show them graphically that the central incisor has a little bit more of a square appearance and the lateral incisor is a little bit more oval. And then the textual information appears in the right along with the particular reference from which that information was taken. And the same with the incisal edge form. I'll ask them, does one of these teeth have an incisal edge that's more curved than the other? And that way they'll give me some responses to that, and then we can show them the information that indeed the central incisor is straighter mesiodistally and the lateral incisor has more curvature. So in that way we can go through the different views, the facial view of the maxillary central lateral, the lingual view of that, the mesial view, and end with the incisal view. So in that way, each group of teeth we can go through and we can compare. So again, going back here, you can see there's maxillary incisors, mandibular incisors, the canines, maxillary premolars, mandibular premolars, maxillary molars, and mandibular molars. And then there's also the section on the unique characteristics. So we could start with the unique characteristics of the maxillary central incisor. In other words, what is unique to that tooth, either to that tooth specifically and only, or to a particular group of teeth that one fits in. So if we looked at mesiodistal and incisocervical crown dimensions, what's unique about a central incisor? And we can click on that and you can see that it has the greatest mesiodistal dimension of any anterior tooth. That's a unique characteristic. And how about the incisal curvature of the cervical line? Well, the incisal curvature of the cervical line on the mesial surface of the maxillary central incisor, that exceeds the dimension of any other tooth. In other words, it has the greatest curvature toward the incisal edge of any tooth in the mouth. These are great questions to have on examinations, and it also helps a student to understand the unique anatomic aspects of each tooth. So in this way, we can go through the principal morphologic comparisons of the teeth along with the unique characteristics. And then after that's done, toward the end of the class period, then I move into the self-assessment examination. So for this example, let's pick maxillary molars, for instance. And if I click and highlight that, then I can start this. And what will happen, there'll be a picture appear on the left, and the student has to identify this. Of course, when we only have selected one category, we already know that this is a maxillary molar, so we click that off, and there's a Get Some Advice button, so we can click on that. And then what this does for us is identify the key features that would help us to identify whether this is a first molar, a second molar, or a third molar. And so you can actually click on any one of these, and that will help to guide you, or you can specifically go to the Identify the Tooth. Now we have the choices, left or right, first molar, second molar, third molar. And so they can click on this, and if they think that this is a third molar, let's say, and they click on that, it'll give them a red X telling them that they're wrong. Once they figure out that this is a first molar, and you'll have students, all kinds of answers will come out. They'll say first molar, second molar, some of them. And this gives you the opportunity to review all of the information that was just covered in the human dentition synopsis. And so the fact that this root extends lingual to the contour of the tooth makes it look like a first molar, and the separation of the roots. And then we have to decide whether we're looking at a mesial view or a distal view of this first molar. And then I tell the students, take the tooth out of the picture, take it out of the picture, hold it in your hand, and put it up in your head. And in that way, you're going to be able to determine whether it's the left or whether it's the right. And so let's say they say it's a left first molar. They got it wrong again. But then they can go to the right first molar, and it tells them it's correct. And then they can go to the next item. And here again, we know that that's a maxillary molar. We can get some advice on it. And we could say, okay, well, how about the facial cusp equality? If I click on this, it tells me when the two facial cusps of maxillary molar have about the same mesiodistal dimension and height, it's more likely to be a first molar. When one facial cusp is smaller and shorter, then it goes on. It's like a second molar. So a student could actually read that text, compare it with the picture, and that would help them to identify which tooth it is. And again, they can go to the next picture. So there are clinical pictures in here. There are extracted teeth. And hopefully everybody would be able to look at this and see that this is a premolar, so they would know that this is then a first molar. So there are clues here that generally make it, some of these pictures, easy to answer. Some of them are harder to answer. They're going to have to look at this picture and recognize that there is no cusp of carabelli, that the distal lingual cusp is smaller and shorter. And so they would say, okay, this is a second molar. And as the students provide verbal responses in class to your question, which tooth is this, that gives you the opportunity to review all of the information. So the sequence in class would be to use the 3D resources and show the students the morphology of the teeth, building in some correlations with other disciplines of dentistry and applying the morphology to a specific clinical situation. Then you go into the human dentition synopsis, where you go through the different step-by-step process by which we'll compare the facial view with the lingual view, with the mesial view, incisal view, or occlusal view. And then we end up with this self-assessment quiz that creates a high level of interactivity. The quizzes that the students have at the beginning of the period, some of the questions on the final exam are actually pictures taken from this program, because we can do a screen capture and you can take this actual picture and it could become a question in class. And that stimulates the students to use the program, and that's where learning really occurs. If we go all the way back to the splash page, then in this section, the interactive dental anatomy class, these are actually recordings of my information that I would give to the students if I were lecturing. This is actually my lecturing to the students related to use of the human dentition synopsis. So you can go in here, you click on the, let's say the facial view here. We're going to look at
the maxillary central and lateral incisors bear some resemblance to each other, but there are anatomic characteristics that help us to differentiate between the two.
So this is sort of a repeat of just what I demonstrated. It gives the student the chance to go back, listen to this as if they had recorded the lecture. They review it, and this goes along to a certain point, and then it stops, and they have to answer a question in order to continue with the program. So it has self-assessment questions throughout it. There's the first lecture on terminology, and then goes through all of these particular sections like we talked about before. There's specialized resources in here where you can go in, and there's things on skull osteology where you can bring up a 3D skull, and you can rotate this around, look at it. You can talk about the morphology of the skull itself. You can show how the teeth relate in there, a variety of things. And there's the section of the mandible that shows the blood vessels and nerves present in there. There's child's skulls that you can see. And there's a section here that has the cranial nerves and the brain stem. And so there are applications that can be made to the between the morphology of the teeth and some other specific specialized resources such as skull anatomy, nerves, and blood vessels. And also back in this section, there's some 3D models that have a particular occlusal relationship. So if you wanted to begin to tie in occlusion, you can do that to show how a class 1 occlusion, how the teeth articulate or fit together with each other. And there's a section that has the contact points discussing which tooth in the opposing arch contacts which area in the opposing tooth. So a little introduction to occlusion can occur in this particular section. And there's information about endodontics, some anthropology, and a variety of resources for use in class and for the students to explore. So to summarize, the use of this program in class, to me, it's a method by which I've been able to engage the students. They pay more attention. Many students actively respond in class, and even those that don't respond are paying attention because they want to hear the responses of their classmates. And this interactivity is enhanced with the assignments given for each class period and the quiz at the beginning of the class based on the pictures and text from the program. And when students have studied this information ahead of class, they're more prepared to provide responses, and that increases interactivity. Also, use of this program outside of class enhances their spatial learning, and I'm interested that students can learn to close their eyes and visualize every tooth from every view, as well as have the necessary didactic knowledge by which they can score well on examinations. So this has been my little quick journey and demonstration of the 3D Tooth Atlas version 8 that has many exciting features that can be of benefit to students and the faculty that teach those classes. Thank you.